Hey kids, howdy, and welcome to this week's episode of Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. It is April 14th. This is for the week of the 14th through the 20th. So we're just coming out of a wacky full moon weekend. That was quite a thing. I had my first shadow class on the day of the full moon, which was such a great combo of astrological energy in first class. And I
Yeah,
always
sounds like
keep
it.
registration open till Tuesday of the week after the first week of classes for people who want to maybe grab this opportunity and are going to catch up using the recording to join us next week. Once we finish Tuesday, registration closes, but if you're still interested in joining me for that shadow class, head on over to michaellennox.com and grab your seat. You can catch up and dive in the waters. Fine. And let's answer a question, as we always do. Since we're in a lunar cycle that got kicked off with an eclipse, I thought I'd answer the question that somebody wrote in about eclipses and actually specifically being born under the influence of an eclipse. So Idilko writes, Dear Dr. Lennox, a friend of mine had a baby on March 22nd, and I was wondering what impact does being born in an eclipse portal have on one's chart, how they would move about in the world. Many thanks for all of the wisdom and joy you bring to all our lives. Sincerely, Ildiko. Thank you, first and foremost. That was sweet. So there are a couple of things to say about anybody born underneath the influence of eclipses. Number one, the relationship between the sun and the moon in anybody's chart gives the information about how the native is the term for like the person whose chart we're looking at, how the native processes moments of being knocked off center and coming back, right? Conscious awareness, the sun, and the unconscious arbiter, the moon, they kind of work in tandem where when we're just in sort of regular space, understanding who we are in a conscious way, that's our sun consciousness. But the moon representing our unconscious impulses can only really be known and understood through interpreting the unconscious. It's kind of like you might be consciously aware that you're having a feeling, and you know that the feeling is coming from something in your unconscious that may be troubling you. We look to the moon to reflect such things. So then the geometry between the sun and the moon in someone's chart describes what the process is for that person to move from a moment of distress to a moment of coming back to center. For example, in my chart, my sun and my moon sextile each other. They're in a 60-degree relationship. And one of my biggest challenges in relationships with all people is how fast I process. I come back to center so quickly because of this setup that I'm ready to be, in forgiveness and moving on and all is well, like minutes after the conflict. Whereas somebody whose moon and sun maybe square each other really have to take some time to process the difficulty of being knocked off center and coming back to center. So somebody who was born in a new moon eclipse is going to have sun and moon in the same sign, which means they're going to have a kind of similitude between how they process their unconscious vis-a-vis their conscious awareness. And the person in a full moon eclipse has the dynamic experience of not being able to control when they get knocked off balance, because it's going to happen often. But there might be something powerful about that person's experience of knowing they're unconscious. So those two things will apply to an eclipse baby, but then you got to amplify it a little bit because of the power of eclipses to just turn energy up. So the person born under an eclipse might have a greater emotional intensity in them just by virtue of coming in when the cosmos was doing something sort of extra. For me, there's no superstitious bother about it, right? And if you hear of any or bump into any, it's probably very old superstitions. Let them go. I've never read anybody who was born under an eclipse who had a particularly this or that experience by virtue of having been born under an eclipse. But the most important thing that is kind of an absolute is the person born into an eclipse is more likely than the average bear to have major life events happen during eclipses. That person is likely to get married in an eclipse, get divorced in an eclipse, move during an eclipse, start a business during an eclipse. So it's something for the eclipse baby to know about using astrology as a planning tool, that eclipse moments are not something to shy away from, but to actually embrace as times that are likely to feature important moments, because that person has comfort in the eclipse dynamism that someone born outside of those moments would not have. So what an interesting weekend we're just coming out of. I certainly talked about the full moon that we just came out of last week. But now that we're through it, now that it was just like 2 days ago, we can sort of contextualize, how powerful it was, especially in matters of the heart, relationship dynamics ruled by Venus, because it was a Libra full moon. And to have the dispositor of the full moon, that is the planet that rules it, it's called disposition. So Venus gives the full moon its disposition because it rules Libra. It's then called the dispositor. So with Venus being the ruler of the full moon and Venus turning around and going retrograde, 40 minutes later, that means the intensity of what a full moon is designed to do, like a psychic surgery, reaching in and helping us offload anything fiery or passive that might be inhibiting our ability to love more fully. The fact that Venus turned around means we're not yet out of a kind of interesting emotional experience where our hearts are in a more vulnerable and tender place right now, because though Venus has turned around and is now direct, she hasn't moved from 24 degrees of Pisces for about just under a week, and she'll stay at 24 degrees of Pisces through Thursday of this week. Now, if I tell you that Mercury's not moving and communication's going to be a little stilted as a result, I think everybody gets what that means. When it comes to Venus not moving and the emotional body being somehow held back, I don't have language that's going to be sort of blanketly applied to everybody, right? It's going to be individual, person to person, that as we move through at least the first 4 or 5 days of the week, that our emotional body is kind of sluggish in some way. And it might take us till Venus is not only moving at the end of this week out of 24 degrees, but it'll take another bit for her to wrap up the whole cycle as she triple transits the things that she hit in the first 2 portions of her cycle. Just understand, though, that your processing of emotions is going to be interesting this week. The benefit of being in Pisces will help. Venus loves it here. So even if she's slow to respond, whatever that means for us in our bodies, at least she's in a place where she's exalted and lifted up and is all about love, forgiveness, compassion, and empathy. Now, Mercury starts out the week in Pisces, and he hates it here. Venus loves it here, and Mercury hates it here. And then Mercury's moving into Aries on Tuesday, and he's fine there, and Venus hates it there. So, what I love about this division between Mercury and Venus sort of going back and forth between places they like and places they don't is the net result for us is an even deeper capacity to have these two retrogrades really change how we think and perceive, how we express love, intimacy, and our relationship to finances, and getting those things into a kind of congruency. And so part of how I've been describing this happening all of these first months of the year is all of the planets crossing over that birth canal from the last degree of Pisces into the first degree of Aries. So Neptune has already done this, and so the planet of inspiration and spirit and the collective consciousness is already on fire in Aries. And at 11:25 p.m. Pacific time, Tuesday night, Mercury will do the same. Mind comes out of the collective, unconscious, and dream world where he can't get his bearings straight and into the fires of Aries, where we will get more clarity about what Mercury was sort of learning in the unconscious processes while he was retrograde. So you can count on Wednesday to be a fascinating day vis-a-vis perception, communication, talk of spirituality and dreams, all of what is possible with planets moving from Pisces into Aries gets put into our perceptions with Mercury doing this Tuesday night into the conjunction with Neptune on Wednesday. So I want you all to be paying attention on Wednesday to how your meditation experience feels. Yes, communication will show up in a little bit more of a fiery way. But what I want you all to do is to test this out with regard to your meditative spiritual practice. It should already have shifted a little bit by Neptune moving into Aries last week, but I want you all to test out what it feels like to go into your particular brand of meditating with Mercury in Aries, having been through this retrograde. Remember, he's still wrapping up, so we're still in the delivery of information, and the conjunction with Neptune that's happening on Wednesday is not only valuable in the way that I've just been describing to let us, take stock of where we're at in our mind and perception with allowing a connection to spirit and inspiration. This was a triple transit. So Mercury did this twice before. On March 2nd, they did this in Aries. Then by retrograde, Mercury met up with Neptune again on March 29th, also in Pisces. Now they meet up in Aries, right? Neptune moved in on the 30th, I think it was. So the next day after Mercury retrograde conjuncted with Neptune on the 29th. And then Wednesday is the third and final wrap up. You might want to look back to early March around the 2nd and late March around the 29th to see if there's any story about inspiration, using your mind to connect with creativity, anything that relates to how you dial into spirit and your practice during those dates, or just anything that might have been confusing because Neptune likes to confuse, Pisces likes to confuse, and Mercury in Pisces is just all about confusion. So that this Wednesday conjunction in fire is a very different message moment. So pay attention, draw lines back to early and late March, and trust that as Mercury continues wrapping up, that we benefit tremendously from the process that he's just been through, though it will take a few weeks for us to figure out how we've shifted. Just by trial and error, we will see our perception, our language, our voices, and our emotional body will be expressing differently as we move through the spring into the summer. And part of that change starts on Wednesday. The weekend is packed.
Another big weekend.
Well, it's the Taurus mansion, so we change sun signs, and all three personal planets do a wrap-up experience. Right about noon Pacific time on Saturday, the sun will move out of Aries into Taurus, and we move from cardinal fire to fixed earth. Mars rules Aries, so we leave Mars having the disposition over the month to Venus ruling how we move through the next 4 weeks. I think a lot of people associate Taurus with like money and luxury, and that is accurate. Taurus invented money and luxury. But from a consciousness perspective, I would rather have you all thinking of Taurus as the inventor of the earth herself. Right? Taurus is Gaia. 6,000 years ago, when we were in the age of Taurus, we were worshiping the goddess and acknowledging the birthing consciousness as the most divine consciousness that there is. We lost that in the age of Aries, which was monotheism. But Taurus connects to that idea that the earth is our mother and that our greatest luxury, our greatest, abundance is just being here on earth in life, and having more of that and more of that abundantly. I like the idea that in the elegance of moving from the void of Pisces, where then Aries, the fire of startup, dives in first and says, I'll go into the void. And he zips in and fierily lands here shouting, I am. That the very next place we go in our evolution is, well, where am I? I'm in form. I'm in groundedness. I exist in a tangible, touchable way. And so if the new moon and the Aries energy that kicks off the year is about what do I want to accomplish in the year ahead, the Taurus energy, and therefore the new moon that'll come in Taurus, is all about taking the vision that we got fired up with and really grounding it in our three-dimensional life of form so that we begin to create things that last. So Saturday, it's Mars's turn to sort of take us through an integration wrapping up moment. And this is also about what happens between the waters of Pisces and the fire of Aries. So Neptune, the planet of spirit, spent the last, since 2011 in Pisces, and Mars in the sign of Cancer has made 2 trines to Neptune since the beginning of the cycle. So if Mars is the body and Neptune is spirit, a triangle between them sets us up to incorporate our spiritual connection and turn it into behavior that the body engages in. In fact, I personally used this Mars retrograde in that way. There were ways it was hitting me in my chart that made it a good time to sort of feel like my body was strapped onto the gurney, and my meditative practice exploded open in the last couple of months. Because I use Mars's cycle to train my body to go deeper every day into my process. And this trine was part of that for me. And for those of you who might have done something similar, Mars trining Neptune does allow for a beautiful incorporation of the inspiration and spiritual connection that Neptune offers being funneled into our bodies. I love the fact that at the first hit of this, October 28th, Mars was in Cancer, Neptune was in Pisces. That's water to water. So that means our fluid nature, our emotional nature, not our intellect, but in how we respond in a feminine way to life, was connecting deeply to spirit. Now, Mars is not that comfortable in Cancer, so we really had to drug the masculine planet to be comfortable with all of that feminine energy. But it happened on October 28th and then again on January 12th. So that's another moment that there might have been something to look at that occurred in your experience around your creative inspirations or your spiritual inspirations, either or both. Now, when they do this for the third and final time on Saturday, now they're both in fire signs. So on Friday, Mars moves into Leo and then is exact in his trine with Neptune and Aries on Saturday. So one of the things we've talked about with Mars moving back and forth between Cancer and Leo is that in Leo, Mars has us living out loud, putting ourselves in the center of everything and shining our light brightly. What Mars said anthropomorphically is, though, when he was in Leo in the fall, he's like, yeah, we need a little bit more self-care, rest and restoration, planning and preparation, which is all Cancer consciousness, right? So Mars said, okay, I won't push y'all out there in your centering of self before we go through a process of diving in and asking the body, what does it need to be powerfully out in the world centering yourself? So what happens on Friday as Mars moves into Leo, that's a significant moment in the retrograde cycle wrap-up that now puts the planet of action into a fixed fire sign where we're out there taking action, being creative, expressing ourselves as a function of centering ourselves in our lives. And the trine to Neptune is like a wonderful sort of fire, trial by fire of connecting to your spiritual center in a way that we have been working on so that we can move forward and be more powerful in our offerings. Now, I don't think you're going to feel that on Saturday. I think you're just going to feel a little bit of fire and hopefully a connection to what occurred at the end of October and the middle of January in your Mars retrograde experience. Be ready to pay attention, though, over the weekend, just to tell yourself the story that you think is unfolding based on late October, mid-January, and now. Sunday, fascinating day. It's a wrap-up of one of the triple transits of Mercury and one of the triple transits of Venus. Let's start with the Venus one. One of the interactions that Venus took us through was a sextile to Uranus. This was the element of change, pivot, new things ending that were part of Venus's interactions because Uranus brings sudden change. Now, sextile is an opportunity. It's potential only. So if you were sitting out the retrograde, scrolling TikTok videos and, practicing escapism, you might not have had the experience that is possible for you. But what has happened with Venus is sextiling Uranus has allowed for sudden shifts that might otherwise be unstable and knock us on our ass. But Venus was also trining Saturn, which gave a kind of stabilizing ballast to all of the sudden shifts and changes that might be occurring in relationship dynamics. I'm thinking of a friend of mine who's in a dating experience that's a little unnerving, and lots of sudden shifts occurred during this Venus retrograde cycle, but he was able to stay present for chaotic, scary moments of change because of the trine to Saturn. He allowed the sextile to shift his experience. So all of us have had some sort of aspect of this steadfastness that Saturn brought to the mix and the ability to change suddenly. And because that's happening on Sunday, there could be a very dynamic experience over the weekend in relationship dynamics and talk of intimacy and maybe even how you relate to your finances. The Venus story first hit on January 26th, and then again by retrograde motion on April 7th. So you want to look back at those dates for anything that felt sudden or unexpected or dynamic or exciting that might have shifted how you relate to love, intimacy, and finances, and know that if there's a connection, be very mindful about what your weekend is, including because there will be wrap-ups to things that might have come up in late January and early April as we move through Sunday. Now, on the same day, Mercury is sextiling Pluto. This is a transit of change and transformation. Mercury, mind, perception, and communication, interacts with the Lord of the underworld, and deep change happens. It's interesting because both Uranus and Pluto are the agents of change, but they're very different. Uranus is fast and sudden and unstable and quick. And Pluto's changes are molecular. They go deep. They are irrevocable. And they have to go to like a deep place in our psyche for such changes to occur. So while Venus and the heart experience on Sunday is moving through something dynamic, exciting, and maybe a little unstable, Mercury is sort of setting himself up to be in deep conversations about change and passion and depth. And, if there's a relationship dynamic that you've got to deal with, but you need to come at it with a sense of empowerment, what a perfect day that is on Sunday, because you've got the Uranus-Venus thing that says dynamic shifts and changes, and then you can move in to the conversation you might need to have with, power and authority in your pocket and have a different kind of conversation as opposed to how you might have handled something before the retrograde. This hit on March 5th and March 25th. So you can glance back to the first and the last week of March for hints about things that might need to be wrapped up and talked about over the weekend. If there is indeed a connection, now you know what you got to talk about. Set yourself up for success. Open your heart, which will be easy to do, and then open your mouth, even if your voice shakes a little bit, and have that difficult conversation. If this is not your story, if you don't see deep connections to these past dates, enjoy a weekend where the sun sign change brings us a little slower pace, more grounded love. Saturday brings us a deep connection to spirit and inspiration through our bodies. And Sunday will be a dynamic day, great for spending time with friends and social gatherings, and have some excitement in the heart and depth in the mind. And have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. Today we have an email and dream, and this is from M.E. in Montana. So it's titled The Fear.
I love when people title their dreams.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. They've turned it into essentially a short story.
Love that.
Okay, so ME says, I'm somewhere in Idaho traveling by car with friends. I'm not sure who. We're on a 2-lane highway, deserted, and we pull over on the left side of the road. I think I might be the person who requested the stop. I get out of the car, and it seems to be an old-fashioned 1950s blue car, like the one my family had years ago. But that's just a quick impression. I'm drawn to an opening in the forest just off the road, and I walk in. I think I'm looking for a place to build a house or cabin, and this is a nice clearing in the woods. Suddenly, I look to my right and freeze. I see a very small valley, more like a wide gully, a few feet beyond the clearing. It's wooded, but I see the edge of a tall white building. It has large windows and a balcony on the front with spindly supports. The building is clearly abandoned and slightly decaying, but still intact. No broken windows or doors. I'm overwhelmed and literally chilled by the wave of horror and
Wow.
fear. I know with my entire body that I need to get away. And I back away, not trusting myself to turn my back on the place. I go to the car and sit back down. I tell my friends to stay away, but they want to see the clearing. They exclaim how perfect it is for my needs, but I won't move from the car. It's warm and safe there, and I'm not moving. They feel nothing strange, but I know to my depths that the abandoned building still holds the energy and echoes of torture and despair. I know I will never return here. And that's it. Much more succinct.
Yeah. I'm torn a little, Zoe.
Okay.
One thing that I hold as a precept of listening to all dreams is, and the language I've used is, every dream is for us. So that ME talks about the intention is to build a house, right? So there's this intention with moving into this place. And then this thing is there. And though her language, I'm assuming it's a her, I don't know why I'm doing that. So if you're a gentleman, my apologies for misgendering you. But ME, I'll say it like this, though. I don't always take a person's fear about something that they perceive in a dream as the meaning, but reflective of some resistance to something that might actually be meaningful and powerful. I'm going to go there more than I'm going to go with, oh, yes, Emmy, you're right. Don't go there. I'm going to automatically say, I'm wondering if this dream isn't telling you that there's something that you are resisting and afraid of that's valuable and helpful to you, but the fear in the dream is sort of captivating how you're contextualizing what came up in the dream.
I need to add something so the dream was in a PDF, so that's what I was reading. Here's an important little tidbit from the email. There's a PS at the end. So the PS is, speaking personally, Idaho has felt like a dangerous place because of several openly racist events over the years. Although I believe that most of the folks are outspokenly against this, not bashing the
So
neighbors.
when was one of the most intense racially charged decades in our history?
Oh my God, yes.
1950s, right? It's just
Yes.
before civil rights and post sort of a long buildup from the Civil War through Jim Crow into the modern era. And the car harkens back to the 1950s. It's also blue, which I get comes from the family car, but blue is about communication and ideas and the throat chakra. So yes, I'm going to now put together that the fear, and I get it, the Idaho landscape in waking life has charge. But I'm still going to say that there's something about that house and the cabin and the clearing in the woods that I think needs another look. First of all, if it's a building that's, well, I'll say it this way. If it's a building, then it's a structure of consciousness, right? Houses are self in dreams, then you can think of buildings, and the larger the building, the more industrial it is, the more the building is reflecting a consciousness of the world and industrialized, stuff that happens out there in public life as opposed to private life. So in this gully that is calling ME to find where life wants to go, right? Home, where is home? The dream sort of asks the question, where shall I go next? Where is home next? A white building, by the color, has a kind of higher consciousness, right? It's not black or red or another color that we would interpret. White is the color of all light, integrated. So there's something more numinous about the white color than if it was a different color. And that it's old and slightly decayed but intact reminds me of we'll just say the consciousness of like racism and working on it that is still intact, though we've made lots of attempts to let an old structure die and fully decay. So I'm going to call that white building a sort of an invitation for ME to sort of lean in the direction of those fears. Not that, okay, the dream is saying you got to move to Idaho, even though it's sort of a place that you don't want to be. It's much more symbolic than that. But anytime we're in the world of what we're afraid of, especially in dreams, then we always want to move in the direction of that which is scaring us so that we can have the transformation that comes when we look at that which we didn't want to look at. So all of the horror and fear and the I need to get away, to me, is that of the witness consciousness of ME. And all of the friends, because these are not people from waking life, right? There was an indication that these are friends, right, that Emmy doesn't exactly know. Am I mistaking that?
They say
not sure who. So that tells me, the listener of the dream, that those friends in the car are aspects of ME who have thoughts around go, push past fear, rah, the cheerleading section. Right? So if I were working with ME, if this were coming up in a class, I'd be like, ME, draw that building, do a little active imagination on the image that from the dream sort of sparked the fear, and just sort of see what happens if you play with that image with active imagination. There might be a dream that comes after in the, week or two that follows that might reveal a little bit more. But I do invite you, and certainly write to us and tell me I'm off the mark. I do invite you to at least consider moving back into the dream and working with that idea that you're never, ever, ever going to go there, and just lean into the fearful image in a creative sort of way and let your unconscious know that you've been paying attention.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.